We've talked a lot about leadership from the point of view of managing our teams. What we don't address as often is executive burnout. And yet, especially in recent years, executives have faced excruciatingly stressful situations. So what can leadership do to help them reduce the stress and position themselves for greater success? I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here today on A Seat at the Table. It's great to have you as part of our international community that now includes over 100 countries. Today I'm speaking with Michael King, an executive coach who has created a proprietary methodology called T.E.A.M.S. For over 20 years, he's worked with both entrepreneurs and corporate executives to help them achieve measurable business growth while reducing a lot of the stress that is typically part of being successful. Michael started as a pastor, which enables him to bring a unique point of view and skill set to his clients. As Michael points out, the destination is not negotiable, but the journey is. In this podcast, Michael talks about the game-changing benefits of celebrating small wins, what leads to executive burnout and how to prevent it, the 5 loudest voices in your life and the critical impact it has on your success, and the difference between blueprints and frameworks and why it matters to your business. Before we get started, if you're in charge of a global supply chain and want a concise, fact-based view of what's happening in Asian markets, then you might want to look at the current situation in sourcing. These quarterly snapshot reports provide a lean, considered take on where the markets are and where they might be heading. They also include feedback from both buyers and suppliers, so you get a clear view of how other sourcing executives are reacting to issues facing the industry. To learn more, head on over to thecurrentsituation.net. That's thecurrentsituation.net. I'll put links in the show notes. Now let's sit down with Michael and find out his strategies for meeting our business targets without being stressed out all the time. Michael, I so appreciate your coming on A Seat at the Table, and I think that, right now, anyone in a leadership role is really struggling to juggle a very complex, a very fast-changing market. They're having to balance more demands on work, at the same time trying to keep teams engaged, keep teams productive. We're coming out of the work remotely, but some people are still working remotely. There's so much going on from a leadership team building kind of a situation. So I'm really interested in your perspective.
It's kind of feel like these are the moments that all of a sudden you wake up and you realize we've been working towards 2022 for probably the last 5 to 6 years. So
interesting.
It's very, very, very interesting for sure.
I do speak to a lot of different people on topics about leadership, but it tends to focus in most cases on developing soft skills. And that's important, of course, but how can we work with teams in a way that's more about achieving goals? Of course, we want to make everybody happy and feel engaged. But we also have to meet goals. And you've developed a methodology, I believe, that you call T.E.A.M.S. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So going back, I started working out my T.E.A.M.S methodology based on a couple different things. And, it's soft skills and higher levels of emotional intelligence within the workspace has been something that's been a probably a little bit of a bigger priority of mine over the last couple decades of leadership, just because of certain pain points that I had experienced within leadership. But as you said, like soft skills can't be everything. And so really the T.E.A.M.S methodology, we break it down into simple ways. Now, T really stands for targets. So every single week, depending on whether you're working with a leader or with your specific team, making sure that your target or your bullseye per se is clearly identified, that it's undeniable, that your team is able to know what a win is. And even you as a senior leader or a leader on a team, if you don't know what your bullseye is, then you really don't know what your business is in the first place. And that E really is wrapped around engagement. Now, when we talk about soft skills, this is interesting because a lot of times we can get wrapped up in a lot of what I call non-tangible soft skills. Engagement is one of those things that you can actually truly measure, but if you're not careful, you can measure the wrong things. And so we specifically focus on 3 to 4 things of engagement. So how am I connecting with my direct report? How am I connecting with my team? How am I connecting with myself? So self-leadership has to be something that you measure and make a priority. And then the 4th thing is, how am I actually engaging with my audience or the crowd or the people, the stakeholders that are specifically interested in the journey that I'm on or the company I'm a part of? A, stands for action. So what is the clear action step that we're making this week? It could be brought down into a simple thing, just one specific thing that we're doing today or tomorrow or this week that's helping us back into our bullseye or to our target. And then M, we talk about momentum. Now, I talk about momentum a little bit differently than some coaches do, because what I find out is like with burnout, a lot of times burnout happens in the pursuit of momentum. It's like it's all of a sudden when leaders are actually starting to add and track so many things on, and they just keep on adding to try to get momentum. What we found is after working with hundreds of different leaders and companies and organizations, our leaders find the best pocket of momentum when they identify the things that are actually slowing them down and they remove them, helping them move along, go faster, right? And which all the questions around that, it's fascinating. As a leader, do you truly feel empowered to identify those things and then remove them as well? And if you don't, or if you do, why would those be the cases? And S stands for synergy. When all the right things are in the right space, doing the right things, and you've really gotten into a really great rhythm, whether that's the chemistry of the team, whether that's the competency, character, etc., but you're winning. Are you able to stop and smell the roses, celebrate the wins along the way, whether they're macro or micro, but clearly identify them and make sure that your story is celebrated? And to the senior leader who's the big type A personality or the one on the Enneagram that's running super fast and super hard, are you able to actually celebrate the things that you don't feel like are really big deals to you, but to everybody else, they're significant wins?
I think those are really, really important points, and I'm really glad. There's so many things you brought up that I'd love to explore further. But the one that strikes me, probably the first, is the importance of being able to celebrate the wins. And I think that one thing that we've lost over decades of being focused on being hyper productive is you never get to that end point on any project or any task where you can just sort of sit back and appreciate what you've done and sort of look at it and maybe really think about, gee, we really accomplished a lot, or let's, debrief and see where it could be better. But it's just always jump to the next project, right? It's sort of like a DJ. The moment one track is ending, you're spinning the next one up so that it never stops. So I think that from what you're saying is that we need to try to find a way to move away from that method of doing things so that we have that opportunity, like you said, to celebrate those wins. It doesn't have to be a month-long celebration, but you know what I mean?
I do know exactly what you mean. And I find it to be somewhat heartbreaking, if I can actually use that term, when a team goes out of a way, or when a leader goes out of their way to acknowledge that something needs to be accomplished in the first place. But yet when the goal is actually reached, we just move on to the next thing. And what it tells me is that all the psychological, emotional, sometimes spiritual energy, sometimes physical energy that we actually put into place to define a goal or to define a win in the first place, when we don't actually stop to acknowledge that, hey, something significant happened here. Let's celebrate this. When we don't take those moments, what we actually do is we discredit the energy and the resources that we put in place to actually create the goal in the first place. And that those things chip away at our credibility as leaders faster than anything that we can really measure. The last thing that you want to do is to communicate to your team that the things that we're doing are temporary, that it's just transactional. And so, yeah, I'll just leave it with that, because we could spend all day long talking about that one thing.
It's such an interesting point, and I'm really glad you brought it up, because you're right, we do overlook that. And I think specifically what you said about the things that are meaningful to us as senior leaders that are looking at a very big picture and very big goals. We overlook the smaller wins that might be a huge win for an individual or a team. So I'm very glad you pointed that out. Now you also talked about executive burnout, and honestly, most of the people who are listening to this podcast are probably nodding their heads, because it's been a grueling, it's going into 3 years of it being very, very grueling and seemingly with no end in sight. So could you talk a little bit about what you said about trying to remove the things that slow you down? It's an interesting way to look at it. No one's brought that up before, so perhaps you could dive a bit deeper into how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm speaking from firsthand experience of between working with leaders that either at some point in my career that I've either worked for or leaders that I'm currently coaching along the way. And if I was a coin of specific phrase, and we're actually working on this concept right now, but it's just simply this: is that stop wanting more and let more happen.
Interesting.
And I want to make sure that that really connects really well, because here's the thing: is that um, in this day and age, I mean, we're in 2022, we're moving forward into 2023. The last 3 or 4 years has absolutely been horrendous for quite a few people in the leadership space. But where leader burnout really starts to happen is when the entrepreneurial spirit actually gets somehow compromised, and we start chasing down things that we were never meant to chase in the first place. So Gary Vaynerchuk, he actually said this: is that the reason why he's successful is because he has a lot of balls in the air all at one time, and he needs to have those balls in the air because only one out of every 36 ideas actually work.
Right.
Well, that's he is right, but not everybody's Gary Vaynerchuk, by the way.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so when it comes to the entrepreneurial spirit within a team construct, you're not in some cases you are the owner, in some cases you're not. But in most situations, even probably the people that are listening to this podcast, if you're responsible for a team, the first and foremost thing that you're responsible for is yourself being a good steward of the vision of the organization and the mission and purpose of why you do it in the first place. When that isn't clear, burnout happens incredibly fast. And it's not something that you can really, once you get off center and you start using company resources to start chasing down a bunch of things that aren't necessarily yours, and you're trying to get wins in spaces that aren't directly connected to your vision, what you're going to find is that you might be moving the ball down the field, but you're playing on somebody else's team. And
Interesting.
it's very important that a senior leader or a visionary leader is able to really focus in on, how am I leading myself? Am I directly connected to the vision and mission of my organization? And is the why behind what we do compelling enough and clear enough to really engage my team to where they're supporting me in this journey? Or am I creating all these separate tangibles or tangents and having my team running in 50 different directions? And in myself, I'm also running in 50 different directions as well.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
I think that's really a good way to put it, because, yeah, we all do face that, especially on the sales and product development side of things, where you're having to meet bigger and bigger goals. And I think that it's easy to get distracted, to lose focus, like you're saying, in a sense, stay in your lane. And if you're doing less, you can do it better. It's a tough discipline, but I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. It's you see so many companies doing that, and I find myself doing that as well. It is not easy to to execute on, but you're right. If you stop and step back and try to keep yourself on track, it is good. What are some of the other things that you feel are that people sort of need to get rid of in order to reduce burnout?
Well, first and foremost is I believe that the cadence and the rhythm of somebody's life really determines whether they can stay away from burnout or whether they don't. Because, for example, I do believe that when we access the emotional energy of our life and we allow ourselves to give away emotional energy to things that don't deserve it, you're really kind of volunteering to be a really great candidate for burnout. And so, who we're surrounding ourselves with. So who are the loudest voices in our lives? Because the things that we hear determine the things that we think about, and the things that we think about determine what we feel, how we feel, determine the decisions that we make. And this cycle just goes over and over and over and over again. So who we actually give access to our emotional energy, and who we give permission to actually determine what's urgent and what's not. is incredibly important. Follow me on this just for a moment here, because I think that this is really important. I was working with one of my clients earlier today, just even to help them try to break out of this cycle. And I think there was an aha moment when she realized that urgent energy triggers an emotional response. And when that emotional response is triggered, they realize that something wasn't a priority in the first place. So it's this cycle of, we label something as being urgent. So, and then we put pressure on our team to be able to deliver now, which makes them feel like it's an emergency. And then it leans into getting an emotional response to be able to produce results, which exposes the idea that something wasn't a priority in the first place. And this is where urgent things only expose emergencies. That's all it does. And so you can never truly have a priority if there's not a strategy attached to it. So cadence is completely important in understanding, how do you get in front of that cycle? How do you get in front of, for lack of a better term, I don't know if you're familiar with the sigmoid curve, right, but the absolute necessary change agents that happen within the organization. So you're either on the front side of making change, or you're on the reactive side or the back side of change. How do you get in front of that? It really comes down to how you're managing your cadence, your emotional health, and really making sure that you're prioritizing putting strategies to the things that matter the most.
Yeah, I think definitely people do fall in the habit of becoming more reactive than proactive. But yet, when you're in a business that by nature is very fast-paced and very uncertain, especially as we're facing, anyone in supply chain, for example, nowadays is certainly feeling that unbelievable uncertainty, trying as much as you can to be ahead of things, but then something changes. How do you implement in these kind of more intense situations what you're suggesting in terms of getting ahead?
Yeah, first of all, is embracing the idea that there are some things that are in our control, and there are some things that are just out of our control. So you've heard the statement before: control the controllables, right, and manage the things that you can't the best you can. So, but just like any basketball game, I mean, that's kind of the way it feels like right now. It kind of feels like, we're in the Final Four. You have, the best teams at the table, and the ones that play the fastest game and manage the clock the best are the ones that are going to end up winning the game at the end of the day. It's the same thing in leadership, of understanding that you have to know who the players are that are in your field, controlling the things that you can actually control. I just used a different analogy there, but controlling, making sure that you have the right players on the court, per se. I'm a musician, and so I get my analogies when it comes to sports wrong all the time, by the way.
Oh, no worries.
But making sure that you have those things, understanding that when it comes to, the chemistry and the character and the competency, and making sure that your team is able to actually perform the way they were originally designed. And so if your vision is on point, your mission is on point, and knowing what you're trying to establish and what you're trying to win at, and then making sure that you're building by design, those are the things that we can control. When it comes to supply chain and all these different things, well, guess what? Everybody is also in those games as well. But how you're controlling the cadence of the game that you're currently playing, managing the people that are on your team, those are the things that are important today. When I talk about top line revenue, when I talk about bottom line revenue, what I'm really talking about is that currently right now in the leadership space, what you're seeing a lot of leaders trying to make desperate, really, really fast plays to get really quick, immediate results to try to turn the tables around a bit. The teams that are doing really well are the ones that are taking a little bit of time to making sure that they're trying to look down the road, 3 years, maybe 4 years down the road, establishing incredibly strong foundations that are unquestionable, and making sure that they stick the landing.
I think it's an interesting way to look at it. It is easier to execute, certainly in calm times, than it is when there seems to be a new crisis unfolding each day. And every time you think you have a plan, suddenly the playing field is all changed. And on the fly, you need a new plan to deal with whatever's come your way. Under a higher intensity situation, what would you advise executives to do? We know what to do under normal times, but what do you do when you're in these kind of very, things happen. You're under tremendous pressure. Suddenly everything you planned, everything's changed. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, The first thing that you do and is recognize that none of us have all the answers to everything. And so even if you're listening to this right now, you might be thinking that you're looking for the golden nugget in what we're talking about. But I will tell you this is that if your leadership strategies that you have at play today are the same ones that you had in play at 2017, you've already lost. So recognize that at somewhere along the way of your transitional journey and transformational journey as a leader, and even in the market space, if you haven't changed up your approach and your strategy, and even maybe even some of the products and services that you offer, or even the type of leadership that you have at the table, you're going to fail if you haven't made drastic shifts and understanding that you're playing a different game. Most of your teams are working remote now, and they get to choose whether they want to work for a company that's going to let them come into work or work from home. So knowing that you have to have these two parallel strategies of digital and in-person experiences, some teams are actually segmenting their teams out a bit to where it's like they have actually these two different strategies being developed in tandem, which is completely fine. The biggest thing that you have to just embrace for right now is just the idea that it's completely okay to break the rules right now, because there are no rules.
Right.
But knowing how to control your cadence and your own personal self-leadership during a season of a little bit of chaos now, it's not as bad as it used to be, but knowing how to reinvent and lead yourself through this is really key.
I think that's an important way to look at it. And it is a very challenging time for leadership. I think that aside from all the competition in most industries, which has certainly become more intense, you have all these other disruptions that are continually surfacing. So it's become not just the competition for, in a marketplace kind of a thing, right? Sell more or reduce costs or whatever the case may be. But now you have more complications in managing teams because you have this, do we work remotely? Do we work in the office? Before that was never a conversation. You worked in the office unless you were with a company that was originally set up to work remotely. So as a leader, you didn't have to deal with that. At the same time, you didn't have all the supply chain snafus that are hitting many, many industries and seem to be very uncertain and changing all the time. So now you're juggling so many balls that it is really, really, it's tough. Are there other ways that people can deal with that kind of a stressful situation, either within their teams or managing themselves? Because part of it, like you said, is you have to manage yourself first before you can manage others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just even coming down to just self-leadership, some really three big components on this are recognizing, okay, what are the inputs of my life? One of the things that I do on a week-to-week basis is that I have about a 35-minute commute from my home into my office into Omaha, Nebraska every day.
Wow.
And I work with global clients, but I also work with clients here in the metro area as well. And so I have a great office space. And so I love going in. And so, but that 35-minute commute of understanding, like, okay, I can actually use that to listen to your podcast. I can listen to other great thought leaders within this space and to try to be as relevant as I can. And the second part of that is what are the new things that I'm trying this week? I've never met a leader ever become a progressive thinker or even become an influencer in the space that they're in without trying new things.
Right.
And so that art of trying new things and becoming a relevant risk taker is what I call it, is an art form within itself as well. And there's all these things that are attached to the security of, are you able to make those decisions and do you feel comfortable doing it? But that third part, so after we go through, a T.E.A.M.S, and when we come through what are our inputs, but this third part of like, okay, what are your influences? We talked about this a little bit earlier about the things that the noise that's in our head, the things that we hear determines the things that we think about. But, I was raised thinking this big lie that somehow the influences in my life, I had to just kind of accept the hand that was dealt to me.
Right.
And, I think that this was probably one of the biggest aha moments in my last 5 years of leadership, is just understanding that I am the sum average of the 5 loudest voices in my life. And so if I want to be a better business leader, I need to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who are just absolute rock stars when it comes to being business leaders. If I want somebody who's great with finance, put somebody who's great with finance in my sphere of, in my influence wake per se. And if I want to be a better dad, if I want to be a better husband, and if I want to be a better something, making sure that I'm actually controlling who sits in those 5 seats of closest proximity to my life is a game changer. And I think that if we're not careful, we become victim of our circumstance instead of trying to actually become leaders through it. And what I'll tell you is that when things are changing so fast, the world really doesn't have time for victim mentality when it comes to our business leaders.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And I like what you said about who you surround yourself with. When I started this podcast was really to surround myself with leaders like that, with people who were the best in class in a wide variety of different disciplines. And because like you said, you can just sit there all day long, and the people you're interacting with, or the amount of alleged news, which is often more noise, that's being pounded at you, really skews your view on things. And you're right, you either become, you get that victim mentality, or you just only see things from one point of view, which is a very negative and a very sensationalized way of looking at things, and might not really be an accurate assessment of the actual situation. So I think it's interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. If you were a senior leader, now I use these 2 terms of blueprints versus frameworks.
Right. Yeah. Could you talk about that a bit? Yeah.
Yeah. It's just been fascinating for us because when we talk about leader burnout, all these things are connected. And what I find is that a senior leader will burn out if they have what we call blueprint performers surrounding the senior leader. Because a senior leader, what they need to be the chief visionary officer. They need to be the chief communication voice of the organization. They're also probably the chief financial influencer of the organization as well.
Right.
And so to be able to really focus in on those 3 specific spaces, the one thing that you're not hearing me do is to say that the senior leader is the chief of strategy. That's not true. In order for them to be fully functional in the gifts and the responsibilities of being the chief visionary officer, they have to surround themselves by people who will build the blueprints, but not be the ones who implement it per se.
Okay.
When a senior leader is surrounded with blueprint people versus framework people, the senior leader becomes the one who develops the blueprints to go along with the strategy. So now you've immediately put a ceiling that's incredibly low in the organization because the senior leader is only building to the things that they're familiar with.
Okay.
So this is a huge thing. So guess who gets burnt out? The whole team, because the senior leader is getting burnt out because they're getting frustrated because they have a vision, but they're not seeing it deployed. So now they have to go ahead and develop the step-by-step playbook and the manual and all the policies and procedures in order to get things to play. And now the team feels like they're being micromanaged and they're trying too many things because the things they were doing aren't working. And the next thing you know, you have an organization that is just being incredibly inefficient and everybody's burning out and everybody's quitting, and you have to reinvent at that point.
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And I'd never thought of it that way, and I hadn't ever heard anybody else put it from that perspective. But certainly where I grew up, and the mindset that I grew up with, was definitely that the leader really had to do everything from coming up with the ideas and the strategy, and you had to be good at everything. So I'm not really phrasing this very well, but you, as a leader, you had to be pretty much good at many, many different things. So I think it's interesting that you put it in a different perspective, which is more of a team approach.
Yeah, and I don't think that you can actually implement a team approach to these types of things soon enough. And I don't even really necessarily care whether you're a team of 10 people or less, or whether you're running an organization of 9,000. One of the executives that I'm coaching right now used to be one of the executives with DoorDash. And so now she's actually the CEO and president of a company in which she only has like maybe 50 employees on her whole staff. So going from 9,000 to 50, there's been a drastic shift in her mentality, even in her management style. But the one thing that I will tell you that she's nailing and she's knocking it out of the park with is that understanding is that a senior leader, especially when they're feeling responsible, they'll take a vision, and a good senior leader will run with the idea of this idea of destination, not negotiable, but journey, it's negotiable. So I don't care how we get there, but let's just get there. and inviting people to the table who are proven experts in the area in which we need to expand. I think empowerment has a certain level of disparity to it, and also the idea of in order for us to truly raise the lid of our organizations, empowerment actually has to have some traction to it, to where when you truly do give things away, sometimes you just have to let people run until they've given you a reason not to. And I'll say this before we kind of go on to the next thing, but one of the areas that I've seen leaders fail significantly during these phases is turning just the word trust, or the idea of empowering leaders, and attaching transactional trust to it. Meaning, I will trust you as long as you do that the way that I want you to do it. But if you're not doing it exactly the way that I want, then I'm going to go and pull back my trust and my empowerment of you. And this is a scenario where we see organizations kind of falter a bit, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. That's exhausting.
Right. So what you're saying is that you have to first get good people and then trust them to execute on a vision, assuming you have communicated that vision well enough that they do understand what the vision is, what the end goal is, and then let them, in a sense, create the journey of how they're going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the tricky part on all this, is because I know that somebody's listening right now and going, well, yeah, but what if I don't have good people? Well, good is really subjective on this. And it really comes down to your perspective as a senior leader in understanding what you have in the first place. When it comes down to the character and the chemistry of the person that you're putting into senior leadership roles within your organization, character is always going to affect performance.
Right.
And here's something where Carey Nieuwhof actually talks about this in one of his books. He talks about the idea that we specifically always develop our training programs towards competency, but we rarely ever develop our training programs towards character. I love that idea.
Yes.
Of just, as a senior leader, when we talk about putting good people on our team, well, that good for you might be simply this: I trust them. I know that they're going to grow. I know that they're going to go ahead and invest to figure out what to do next. They're not going to knock it out of the park the first time, maybe not even the 10th time, but I know that they're going to give me something eventually that's going to blow my socks off. I just might have to wait for it a bit. It's really one of those things, because I think that's one of the things that I'm struggling with right now with quite a few of my teams, is that I know that I'm working with senior leaders that are impatient.
Right.
And because they've put people in positions to where they can't perform yet, but I can see that they trust them.
Well, Michael, you've shared so many excellent insights. I've learned a tremendous amount just through this conversation. Where can people find you? I think a lot of people would like to connect with you and reach out.
Yeah, I would love that. Currently, even on my website. So it's my website is T.E.A.M.S.coach. So that's the name of my company and also my website. And you can find me on all social channels. So on Facebook, T.E.A.M.S.coach. Michael King is my personal Facebook. Make sure to hit me up. And Instagram, T.E.A.M.S.coach. Twitter, Michael King Jr. So make sure just to reach out and say hi. I think even just getting connected with us on social, we really use social media, not necessarily as an advertising arm of our company, but we really use social media as a way just to serve the leadership space of our community. So don't feel like by texting me or sending me a message that you're going to pull into a click funnel. That's not really what we're all about. We have some really cool resources that we love to partner with people to make sure we get into your hands. Excellent.
Well, I'll make sure that all of that is in the show notes. And of course, it'll be over on our website at seatpodcast.com, because we have all the podcast playlist there as well. So I want to thank you so much, Michael, for taking your time and really for sharing so much with our community. It's greatly appreciated.
Oh, it's been amazing being with you. Thank you so much for making time for me.
Thank you for tuning in to A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. Your feedback powers this show. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Also, share episodes you found valuable on LinkedIn or other social media, and call out your biggest insight or takeaway from the program. And don't forget to tag me, Jane Singer. I love seeing which episodes you liked best. And if you have time, please leave a review on any of the major podcast channels. Also, don't forget to check out our website, seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. You'll find all kinds of bonus content there, including free ebooks, discounts on apps and other products, as well as a preview of upcoming podcast episodes. You can also send a message with any thoughts, feedback, or suggestions there, and yes, I will read them. Thank you for joining me today and supporting the show. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in our next episode of A Seat at the Table.